Welcome to the deep dive. Imagine pouring, I don't know, $30,000 into a complete kitchen renovation.
Oh, man. Just thinking about that gives me anxiety.
Right. You're dealing with loud contractors for months. You sacrifice all your free time, only to sit down at the closing table and realize you actually lost money on the sale of your home.
And the crazy part is, it happens every single day.
It really does. We are taught that selling property is just this straightforward path to cashing in on our biggest financial asset. But when you look closely at the actual mechanics of the transaction, it often looks a lot more like a financial trap.
It is a massive vulnerability in how we handle personal wealth. I mean, the traditional real estate market is engineered to operate on delayed gratification and just a remarkably high tolerance for risk.
Yeah, we've basically normalized a system that forces sellers to navigate an incredibly inefficient process.
Exactly. A process completely reliant on external gatekeepers who have total control over the outcome.
So today, we are taking a deep dive into the hidden machinery of modern real estate transactions. We're using a really comprehensive framework developed by a Florida-based company. They're called Sell House Fast Cash Bradenton.
Right, we're looking specifically at their guide on the smart way to sell your home fast for cash.
Yeah, and our mission today isn't just to summarize their process. We are going to deconstruct the traditional home selling obstacle course, expose the hidden costs that quietly drain your equity, and, examine how direct cash buying models are systematically altering the landscape of property transfers.
Which is a huge shift in the market right now.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this, because most of us still picture selling a home the old-fashioned way. Imagine baking fresh cookies for the open house, planting the for sale sign in the front yard, and just waiting for the right buyer.
The classic American dream scenario.
Exactly. But this source material outlines a completely parallel, highly predictable business model operating right alongside that traditional market.
And that alternative model is gaining serious market share for very specific data-driven reasons. If the thought of navigating a real estate transaction fills you with anxiety, honestly, your instincts are entirely correct.
Yeah, you're not crazy for dreading it.
Not at all. Our goal today is to apply an objective lens to your physical assets. By identifying the exact friction points of standard property sales, we can understand why an alternative mechanism even needs to exist. You have to understand the flaws in the current market mechanics before the cash buying solution makes logical sense.
That makes total sense. So before we can really grasp the cash buying shortcut, we need to look at why the standard road is so notoriously fragile.
It's incredibly fragile.
The best way to visualize a traditional real estate transaction isn't the simple exchange of goods. It's more like a complex supply chain with a dozen single points of failure. Think of it like a relay race with far too many runners where any single person can drop the baton.
That's a perfect analogy.
You've got the real estate agents on both sides, the municipal inspectors looking for code violations, the bank appraisers assigning value, and the loan officers underwriting the debt.
And every single one of those individuals holds absolute veto power over your transaction. Every participant you add to a deal mathematically increases the probability of a complication and, simultaneously extends the timeline.
Right. And the breakdown almost never happens right away. It's those late-stage failures that are so devastating.
What's fascinating here is the data on why these deals collapse. The framework points out that standard contracts rarely fail because a buyer simply changes their mind. The critical point of failure at the 11th hour is almost always buyer financing.
The buyer thinks they have the money, but the bank pulls the plug.
Exactly. The bank is the ultimate decision maker. The mechanism at play is the underwriting process. I mean, a buyer might look perfectly qualified on paper when they make the offer.
But 45 days is a long time.
Right. Over a 45-day closing period, banks can shift their lending requirements. Interest rates might fluctuate, altering the buyer's debt-to-income ratio. Or the bank's appraiser decides the house needs a new roof before they will use it as collateral for a 30-year mortgage.
Wow. So you're just at their mercy.
Completely. When the bank denies the loan, the seller is left stranded. You are completely dependent on a third-party financial institution that has zero vested interest in your personal timeline or your financial well-being.
And while you are waiting on that bank's approval, you are paying a massive lifestyle cost. I mean, the staging phase alone is a logistical nightmare.
Oh, it's awful.
If you are selling the home you currently live in, you are basically forced to live in a museum. You have to vacate your property every single weekend to accommodate public viewings.
And you have to keep the home pristine 24 hours a day.
Yeah. If you have kids or dogs, you have to systematically erase all evidence of them existing every time a potential buyer wants to walk through. It requires an immense amount of unpaid labor just to maintain the illusion of a perfect house.
It creates a state of perpetual anxiety for the seller. You're managing a second unpaid job as a property custodian, all while carrying the risk that the deal might fall through at the last minute.
Wait, I have to stop you there, though. This all sounds exhausting, but bypassing an agent and selling directly to an investor or cash buyer usually means taking a massive haircut on the sale price.
That's the common assumption, yeah.
Right. The conventional wisdom is that if you skip the open market, you are leaving thousands of dollars on the table. Are we really saying sellers don't lose equity this way? Let's look at the actual math to see if skipping the middleman actually preserves wealth.
That is the pivotal question. To answer it, we have to shift our perspective from looking at the gross price to the net profit. The Bradenton framework provides a very clear comparative breakdown of three distinct selling methods. Let's dissect the mechanics of each.
Okay, lay it on me.
First, the traditional agent route. The data shows this takes 45 to 90 days to close. It extracts 5 to 6% of the final sale price in agent commissions.
Which is a huge chunk of money.
Massive. It also carries high repair obligations because, as we discussed, standard appraisals require the home to meet specific structural conditions before a bank will fund the loan. And, of course, there is a high risk of the buyer's financing failing.
So the traditional route is essentially high cost, high friction, and high risk. What happens if you try to cut out the listing agent and sell it yourself?
The for sale by owner, or FSBO, method, the mechanics here are really revealing. The data shows this route actually takes significantly longer, an average of 60 to 120 days.
Wait, really? Why does it take longer if you're the one directly in control?
Two main reasons. First, individual sellers lack access to broad syndication networks like the multiple listing service, so the property gets far less visibility.
Oh, that makes sense.
And second, sellers often lack objectivity. Emotional attachment leads to overpricing the home, causing it to sit stagnant on the market. Furthermore, even without a listing agent, sellers usually still have to pay a 2 or 3% commission to the buyer's agent to incentivize them to bring a client.
So you're still paying commissions anyway?
Exactly. Your repair obligations remain high, and the risk of the buyer's bank denying the loan is identical to a traditional sale.
Wow. So you take on the full-time job of marketing and negotiating, but you still don't eliminate the bank's veto power over your buyer.
It is the worst of both worlds. Now look at the mechanics of the direct cash buyer model outlined in the source. The average time to close drops drastically to just 7 to 14 days.
That's incredibly fast.
Yeah. The required agent commissions are zero. The repair obligations are zero because the property is purchased entirely as is. Most importantly, the risk of buyer financing failure drops to zero.
Because there is no bank involved at all. They're using existing liquid funds.
Right. The money is already sitting in the buyer's account. They don't need an underwriter's permission to spend it.
So what does this all mean? When you line up these three models and run the numbers, the math forces you to completely redefine how you calculate a home's value.
Exactly. The headline sale price you see on Zillow or a traditional real estate listing is an illusion. It does not represent the actual cash entering the seller's bank account.
It's just a vanity metric.
Basically, yeah. To find your true net profit, you have to start with that gross number and systematically subtract. Subtract the 6% in agent commissions. Subtract the buyer-requested concessions, which are credits the buyer demands after the inspection to fix minor issues. Subtract the seller's portion of the closing costs.
And then you have to subtract the compounding holding costs.
Oh, the holding costs are the silent equity killers. Over those 90 to 120 days the home sits on the market, you are still paying property taxes, homeowners insurance, utility bills, and potentially a mortgage.
It just chips away at your profit every single day.
When you deduct all of that from the gross price, the actual take-home profit shrinks significantly.
You're financially bleeding the longer it sits there. So by cutting out the intermediaries, you aren't necessarily accepting a lower offer in real economic terms. You are preserving the equity you already possess by plugging the financial drain of a prolonged listing.
That's exactly it. You're trading a theoretical high gross number for a guaranteed optimized net number. The predictability is the feature, not a bug. You are trading months of compounding financial risk for a guaranteed 7 to 14-day execution.
Now, that mathematical breakdown makes perfect sense for someone looking to sell their primary residence quickly. But diving into the framework, it becomes clear that this direct-to-buyer model is exponentially more vital when property ownership is forced upon someone. Let's talk about inheritance.
A very common, very stressful scenario.
Right, because life events do not care about market timing. Inheriting a property suddenly thrusts an incredible emotional and financial burden onto a family.
The transition from grieving family member to active property manager happens overnight. It is an incredibly jarring shift in responsibility.
And the source material highlights a highly specific and honestly alarming mechanism of property degradation, particularly in the Florida climate.
The climate is a huge factor.
Yeah. If you inherit a house in Bradenton, you are immediately on the hook for those holding costs, taxes, insurance, water, power. But beyond the bills, you are actively fighting the environment.
And Florida humidity takes no prisoners.
Seriously. If the HVAC system fails in an unoccupied Bradenton home during the humid summer months, the timeline for destruction is terrifyingly short. The humidity permeates the drywall, the flooring warps, and mold can set in within days.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this kind of environmental pressure feeds directly into the psychology of the ROI trap.
The return on investment trap.
Right. When people inherit a home, their instincts are usually dictated by traditional market conditioning. They look at a house that hasn't been updated since 1995 and think, well, we can't sell it like this. We need to tear out these old carpets, update the kitchen cabinets, and maybe patch the roof.
Because they know a traditional buyer, using a traditional bank loan, expects a move-in ready home.
Exactly. They fall victim to the sunk cost fallacy. They assume putting money into the house automatically means getting more money out. But the framework explicitly outlines the reality here. These cosmetic or structural upgrades rarely yield a dollar-for-dollar return.
So you're actually losing money by fixing it up.
Usually, yes. You might sink $30,000 into renovations, only to increase the final appraisal value by $20,000. You have fundamentally lost $10,000 of the inherited equity.
Not to mention the logistical nightmare of managing that project. I mean, trying to coordinate plumbers, electricians, and drywallers from 3 states away,
It's a full-time job.
all while knowing that one failed air conditioner could let the Florida humidity ruin the new work you just paid for.
It transforms an inherited asset into a massive liability. The direct cash model offers a structural intervention here. By purchasing properties in their exact current condition, regardless of outdated kitchens or failing roofs, these investors allow families to liquidate the physical asset rapidly.
They don't have to fix a single thing.
Right. The family avoids draining their own savings to prep the house for the retail market. They can settle the estate, halt the ongoing tax and utility drain, and divide the financial assets equitably without enduring months of construction management.
It fundamentally changes the goal. The objective shifts from maximizing a speculative retail sale to efficiently transferring a distressed asset.
It is a totally different strategic approach to wealth management. You prioritize liquidity and speed over theoretical gross margins.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We've established the mechanics of why someone uses this service for a distressed or inherited single-family home. But as I read through the application of this model, the scale of it is surprising.
It really expands beyond what you'd think.
Yeah, it's not just limited to 3-bedroom suburban houses. The data shows this direct transaction model is actively adapting to handle commercial properties, apartment complexes, and mobile homes with equal efficiency.
The scalability of the model is what makes it a genuine macroeconomic shift rather than just a niche service.
Let's look at commercial real estate. Why does a commercial property owner need a fast cash buyer? The framework notes that commercial properties face incredibly long listing periods and highly specific buyer requirements.
Oh, the commercial market is notoriously slow.
Right. And the direct cash model entirely bypasses the heavy red tape of commercial bank lending.
Because the commercial lending mechanism is labyrinthine compared to residential mortgages, a traditional commercial loan is subject to intense underwriting scrutiny.
Like what kind of scrutiny?
Well, the bank often requires extensive environmental assessments, like Phase 1 environmental site assessments. Those take weeks and cost thousands of dollars just to determine if the soil is contaminated.
Just for the soil? Wow.
Yeah. They scrutinize the rent rolls, the local zoning laws, and the specific business history of the property. Bypassing that entire institutional gauntlet provides a massive strategic advantage for a commercial seller who needs immediate liquidity to reinvest elsewhere.
And the same principle applies to alternative housing options, like mobile homes, which are increasingly vital for affordable living in areas like Bradenton.
Mm.
The structural type of the property changes, but the core mechanism of bypassing the bank remains consistent.
Exactly.
But, naturally, if I put myself in the seller's shoes, I still have some healthy skepticism. If we are completely removing the bank's appraiser from the equation, how do we agree on a valuation that isn't just an arbitrary lowball number?
That's a very fair question. The valuation mechanics are critical to understand, and the source material explicitly addresses this in their FAQs. The cash offer is not pulled out of thin air.
Okay, so how do they calculate it?
The evaluation relies on three concrete, data-driven metrics. First, the current physical condition of the property. Second, the hyperlocal geography, specifically its location within Bradenton or Manatee County. And third, the recent local sales data of comparable homes in that exact neighborhood.
So they are still pulling the comps, the comparable sales data, to establish a baseline value.
They rely heavily on market data. The difference is they are not filtering that data through a bank's restrictive lending criteria.
Ah, I see.
A bank appraiser looks at a comp and says, well, this house sold for $300,000, but your house has an older roof, so we won't lend on it. A cash buyer looks at the same comp and calculates the mathematical cost of replacing the roof themselves, subtracting that from the value to formulate a fair cash offer.
So they use data, but they execute with liquid funds, so no underwriter has to bless the math.
Precisely.
That makes a lot of sense. But as I was reading the fine print of the transaction mechanics, there was one specific detail that genuinely stopped me in my tracks. It's their leave the debris policy.
Oh, yeah. From a psychological standpoint, it is arguably the most radical departure from traditional real estate norms.
Think about the actual physical process of moving. The most agonizing part is always the final cleanout. You are exhausted, everything is packed, and you are left staring at the heavy, outdated furniture you don't want, the broken lawnmower in the shed, and decades of accumulated junk in the garage.
It's the worst part of the whole process.
But the framework explicitly guarantees that sellers do not need to clean, paint, or even empty the house. You take the personal belongings and family heirlooms you actually want to keep, and you literally walk out the front door, leaving all the remaining items, furniture, or outright debris behind for the buyers to process.
When you apply that mechanism to an inherited property scenario, the relief is profound. Imagine inheriting a home filled with 40 years of a relative's belongings.
Just mountains of stuff.
Right. The traditional market requires you to spend weeks sorting, hauling, and paying for dumpsters before you can even list the property. The cash model absorbs that logistical burden entirely.
You just hand over the keys and walk away.
Yep.
And on top of the physical relief, the financial fine print is incredibly strict regarding fees. There are 0 agent commissions and 0 hidden administrative charges. The cash offer presented on day 1 is the exact mathematical amount wired to your account at closing.
No surprises at the closing table.
Exactly. The buyer absorbs all the standard closing costs associated with the legal transfer of the deed.
It completely sanitizes the financial transaction. All ambiguity is removed. The mechanism becomes a transparent, highly efficient vehicle for transferring ownership without the traditional friction.
So to pull all of these threads together, we've been analyzing a fundamental divide in the mechanics of property transfer. The traditional real estate market is an entangled, fragile supply chain reliant on banks, inspectors, and agents.
It requires the seller to absorb compounding holding costs and subjects them to the constant threat of late-stage financing failures.
Conversely, the direct cash buying model deconstructs that process. It strips the transaction down to a predictable, fast-tracked agreement.
It eliminates the unpaid labor of staging, removes the reliance on institutional gatekeepers, and neutralizes the risk of underwriting collapses.
It really all comes down to control. The seller retains control over the timeline, bypasses the repair obligations, and secures a mathematically guaranteed net profit on closing day.
The ultimate takeaway here requires us to fundamentally redefine financial literacy in the context of real estate. True financial literacy is the ability to recognize the stark difference between a property's public listing price and the actual preserved equity you secure after time, friction, and hidden fees are extracted from the deal.
It's about what you actually keep.
Exactly. Speed and certainty are not just conveniences. They carry a very real, measurable financial value.
You aren't simply selling a piece of real estate. You are buying back your own time, avoiding costly renovations, and securing peace of mind.
This raises an important question, one that extends far beyond a single case study in Bradenton, Florida. If this direct-to-buyer cash model proves that we can entirely eliminate the need for bank underwriters, mandatory structural appraisals, and traditional real estate
which
agents.
are the pillars of the current system.
Right. What happens to the broader macroeconomy of housing and lending if this frictionless direct method eventually becomes the standard way we all transfer property?
It makes you wonder. I mean, if you don't have to navigate a supply chain with a dozen points of failure, why would you ever choose to take the risk? We'll leave you with that to think about. Until next time, thanks for taking the deep dive with us.